All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Friday Morning Live. I am Dave Newell, your host this morning. It is February 21st, 2025. Hope all is well wherever you all are viewing this today. We appreciate your time and effort. And as we go through the presentation today, we certainly encourage questions. So if you have questions, put them in the question pane, and we will get to as many as we can. If we can't get to your question today, we'll certainly get offline and get you a direct answer. So feel free to ask questions through the question pane. Wow, our old friend and colleague Tom Poppel is on. You brought some retired executives from insurance companies out, BG.
Man, That's a big deal.
So let's see here. What's going on here? Okay, that's not working. Let's go to the Plan B, BJ. Let's go. There's Dave Newell and Laura Pearce. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning. Hope
And BG Murphy. So the gang's all here. Oh, you want me to move that out of the way? Okay, I can do that.
I don't need to see my face. I just want to see the slides.
There you go. All right.
There we go.
Just some housekeeping, folks. As we are less than 2 weeks away from Capital Days, BG, just a reminder, if you've not registered for Capital Days, certainly we encourage you to get online. Unfortunately, folks, the hotel block at the AC Hotel Marriott has been full. We have some overflow hotels that are online. If you have any questions about alternative accommodations, please send us a note. We can certainly refer you to some other fine hotel establishments in town. But please join us, right? BG, why is it so important that agents come to our Capital Days?
Listen, at the end of the day, we have a very good political and legislative system here at FAIA. Laura and Kyle and the entire FAI team, myself, and then our contract lobbyists, we do in my opinion, unbiased opinion, we do it better than anybody else. But the truth is, at the end of the day, we're not a constituent of all 160 legislators. There is a testimony that only a constituent can provide to their elected official. And so hearing from businesses in their district about the problems that their constituents are facing, that's testimony that can only be delivered to them from someone in their district. I'll also say this: Capital Days is during the first week of session this year.
Yeah.
Could be here for opening day of session to see all the pomp and circumstance. So be extra exciting this year.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So Alicia just wrote, and she just canceled one of her rooms. So if you're looking for a room at the AC Marriott, I would get online as quickly as possible. Alicia just released a room.
She should have run that by us first. We could have put that on the bidding market,
And just a reminder, folks, we continue to acknowledge FAI's education. We have web-based learning here. So every week, get online and see what the new topics and classes are that are coming up. And certainly, we encourage you to take advantage of what's going on. Speaking of taking advantage, BG, let's go. Florida's Association of Insurance Agents Spring E-Summit. The crack of the bat, the smell of baseball is in the air, right? FSU is home this weekend. Spring training is in full swing. Folks, we bring you the E-Summit each spring to offer you great content. It's 10 hours of CE. It's open to all FAI members, including associate members. So if you have a license and you need CE, certainly encourage you to register for our Spring E-Summit. As you see on the screen, March 18th through the 20th, and it includes the E&O class. So that is something that I know we get a demand for this time of year, BG, so we offer it. So encourage you to get online, register for the E-Summit. It's a Tuesday and Wednesday of scheduled times, and then Thursday, BG, it's a free-for-all. You can take the classes throughout the day. So whenever it fits in your schedule, you just take a class.
And I'll tell you, Dave, Laura and I did just reduce those number of hours down a couple of years ago, so there's no excuses.
No excuse. No excuse to get online. So, and then lastly, but certainly not least, is acknowledging our convention. I will tell you, of course, those that work inside this building, is still a lot of activity leading up to convention. The exhibit hall, I don't want to jinx it, but we are getting very close to being sold out again. Okay, BG? And the speakers, what we've lined up for breakout sessions is second to none. So if you've not gotten your hotel room, and I say it every week, hotel room first, registration second, because this is a popular hotel, just like the one here in town for Capitol Days, and we sell out. So if you're coming to convention or think you're coming to convention, go ahead and get your room reserved and then get online and register. You can always release the room just like Alicia did, but sometimes these rooms sell pretty quick. I know from our Monday meetings, Laura, Cindy's already added rooms to our room block.
Yeah.
So folks, just a reminder, if you've not gotten your room for our annual convention in June, certainly recommend that. So let's turn our attention to today's topic. And so welcome again, BG and Laura. I appreciate y'all being here. And let's kick it off, BG. A lot of fodder up here. Last week of committee weeks is this week. So there were some meetings. You and Laura were all over the Capitol. But there's some new sheriffs in town. And so as people come to Tallahassee in a couple weeks, what is the expectation of what this political climate is here in Tallahassee?
Dave, that is a spectacular question, is one that we talk about a lot. For those of you that have an opportunity to attend our summer leadership planning meeting, when we sit down and kind of talk about what we're going to be looking at over the next year, one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about, excuse me, is the political dynamics of Tallahassee. What are we going to be looking at? And so with the elections wrapping up in November, we now have two new leaders leading the House and Senate. Senate President Ben Albritton over in the Senate, and then Speaker Danny Pearce over in the House. For those of you who've listened around and listened to us talk about legislators all the time, Ben Albritton's family is actually a former agency owner. He's a little bit more focused on the ag side of the issues and some of the other things outside of insurance. But the good thing about Ben is he relies on experts in his chamber. And so, anytime I go to talk to the Senate president's office, they're like, where's Senator Boyd on the issue? Where's Senator Boyd on the issue? And so he really does do a good job of relying on those subject matter experts in his chamber. On the other side, we have House Speaker Danny Pearce, and I'll add a full disclosure before I then get into what I'll say about him. Speaker Pearce is a phenomenal friend of FAIA. During his time in the legislature, he's been pretty open about how he feels about the insurance industry. Has a lot of frustrations with the industry, and kind of a unique perspective. But the neat thing about Speaker Pearce is he recognizes the perspective of insurance agents. He knows at the end of the day that we're always going to want to support a healthy and sustainable insurance marketplace, but that we won't ever cross that line of supporting or pushing for something that's going to be detrimental to consumers. And so what I oftentimes tell people is we may not be able to change Speaker Pearce's position or opinion on some of the bigger issues, like if, revamping the recent tort reforms all of a sudden becomes a priority this session, we may not change his philosophical viewpoint on that, but you better believe that he's going to have full consideration as to what the impact is for the agents in the state of Florida. And it's interesting, we've had supermajorities in the House and the Senate recently. But this election, it changed, and it actually changed again after the election, is we had two Democrats change the Republican Party. And so I'll talk about the supermajority in just a brief second of why that's important. But one of the members who changed party affiliations this year is Representative Hillary Cassell. I was meeting with our PAC boards yesterday and just kind of giving a political update. And I told them, I said, I said, I need to let y'all know that you're going to look at me crazy, but hear me out before we start getting into this. Hillary Cassell, while being a very dear friend of both Laura and mine and the associations, she is a trial attorney. And when I tell you trial attorney, they do nothing but litigate insurance cases. But that's where FAI kind of stands aside, is that, it's so easy to, not prioritize the importance of meeting with those people, because again, we have that perspective that we have the opportunity to represent, which is the agent's perspective. And so she, after changing parties, the Speaker of the House, because her changing parties now gives him the ability to say that he now has the largest supermajority in the state's history in the House of Representatives. One of the trade-offs is she got the vice chair of the House Insurance and Banking Subcommittee. So lots of things going on there. Very briefly on special sessions, because I do want to make sure we have time to get through a lot of these bills that we're talking about. It's important to know what's been going on from a political perspective in Tallahassee. Last year, end of last year, beginning of this year, the governor announced that he wanted to convene a special session to address immigration, condo issues, additional funding for My Safe Florida Home program, and post-hurricane relief funding. The legislature was none too thrilled that he called a special session. They came in as they were constitutionally required. They adjourned out of the first special session, killing all of the governor's priorities. They then reconvened a few minutes later and passed their own insurance bill, or own immigration bill, but did not do anything on the My Safe Florida Home. They didn't do anything on the hurricane funding, and they didn't do anything on condos. So they adjourned out of that session, came back for another special session, and passed what most believe is a compromise immigration package between the House and the Senate. But the drama is not done. The House continues to meet to review the vetoes from the budget, the governor's vetoes of the budget last year, where they're presumably going to use the supermajorities to overturn those. So the tensions are not at stage 5 right now, but I would say they're probably pretty close, given everything that's going on.
And I would add to that, the special sessions on immigration and the budget discussions have really limited the number of bills that were heard during committee week. In all the years I've been lobbying, I don't think I've ever seen so few bills move through the process during the committee weeks, which just means that they're all left for the regular session, which is going to be difficult for some of these bills to get across the finish line when they have 3 or 4 committee references and haven't been heard at all yet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. That's going to be an uphill fight, right, BG? I mean,
well, for some of these bills, thank you, Jesus. We'd love for it to be an uphill battle for some of these bills. So, but as you've heard, the governor's done several press conferences throughout the state. The legislative leaders have talked about it. Insurance is now polling is the #1 issue for Floridians, and it has recently in some polls bypassed inflation, the cost of property insurance. And so while, we are seeing all of the positives really start to show themselves in the marketplace from recent reforms, the cost of insurance continues to be a top political issue. And because of that, we have seen just in the past 48 hours, numerous bills pop up, and there are going to be a lot more. Last thing that I did want to just briefly touch on is it's going to weigh into kind of everything we're working on with insurance this year is the citizens insurance rates. And I could pontificate on this, but I'm sitting next to the king of citizens at FAI. So Dave, if you wouldn't mind kind of just giving a little bit of information on what we saw recently.
As we sit here, this rate filing was filed several months ago, well before the end of 24, and it just continued to be delayed or be discussed or be revised. But recently, the OIR issued an order on February the 5th, advising what they feel citizens' rates should be going forward. So based on that order, the overall statewide average for multi-peril will be 6.6%.
And remind us what was requested by citizens.
14.5%. 14%.
Yeah.
So certainly different, and those programs will be in effect for policies June 1 of 25 and beyond. So the few months to lead up to that, but anything June 1, renewing on June 1, or new business on June 1 will be impacted by these discussions. What about the condo? Well, Alicia, I was going to get to that. So thank you for sharing that and where that piece of paper came from. But that was for the homeowners condos. For commercial residential, it looks like they've implemented a statewide average of 7.1%, and they've asked for 14. So again, there is an increase for commercial residential, 7.1%. But that's a statewide average, folks, and we know the way that works, right, BG?
Yes, sir.
Some may get 0 increase, some may get 7.1, some may get 14%. It just depends on your territory. The questions are coming in. We'll get to those, but we want to talk about a few bills too, right, BG? But
that's right.
But that is what we're looking at, and then don't know if it matters, but we could talk about the commercial, which is the non-condo stuff that Citizens writes in the commercial space, and that looks like a statewide average of about 11% increase overall. So some are going to get 0, depending on your locale, and some as high as 14%. So this is the order. What we really need is when Citizens does their analysis, and they do it by territory. So the people in Fort Myers, or the people in Jacksonville, or the people in Pensacola, they'll see the true rate effect.
Yeah.
Okay. So certainly we're going to get to your questions, folks, but let's go ahead and kind of list the bills. This is a lot, right, BG?
It's a lot.
But we've kind of narrowed it down for today's discussion. Certainly, when you come up in 2 weeks, some of this stuff will be discussed at length in more detail, because we'll have more detail about it.
That's right.
But today's purpose, we want to kick it off with House Bill 643, Representative Snyder, residential market insurers.
Perfect. And before I go into this, Bill, I'll just briefly say that list of bills, Dave gives us a drop dead time where we have to have the slides to them. Even that list of bills is now dated because there have been more bills that have been filed. So to Dave's point, this is kind of a viewpoint of where we're at. We're not going to touch on all of these today, as some of them, while I don't give anything a certainty of not moving, I oftentimes am able to look at some of them and say that that's not going to move for a multitude of reasons. But the first bill, House Bill 643 by Representative Snyder, and Senate bill, there is a blank. That's not a typo. The bill has not been filed yet, although we do expect to see it pop today. Residual market insurers. This is FAIA's priority bill. And so when we sat down with the Legislative Council over this year, or over the summer last year, I suppose, one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about was, the previous session, what's going on in the marketplace, what are our fears and concerns for the upcoming session, and kind of the overwhelming feeling of many people who are in that room was, we don't need to be going after substantial public policy reforms, given that there's already high-profile members of the legislature talking about the need to revisit recent reforms. So the council very wisely said, what are some issues that we can look at that will really be agent specific, that should be what we consider to be non-controversial? And that's what this bill represents. I would ask you to give me a drum roll, but the first bullet point speaks for itself. I told Kyle, I think this has been on our plan of work for 20 years, but
You're just guessing. You haven't been here for 20
I'm guessing I was getting my learner's permit 20 years ago. But with that being said, might this be the year that we finally put an end to the diligent effort? I'm feeling real sporty about it, Dave. So not much to provide on the repeal of diligent effort. I think everyone on here knows it serves no purpose, knows that it does absolutely nothing to keep business from going to the surplus lines market that doesn't need to go there. But that's the spiel on diligent effort. The next part of that bill, if you all will remember, in one of the bills last year, the law was changed to require any agent appointed with Citizens. Previous law required them to have an appointment with at least one authorized insurer currently writing business in the state of Florida. That was changed to 3 authorized appointments with insurers writing business in the state of Florida. And the law was further clarified to clearly state that the 3 authorized appointments applies to each line of insurance that the independent agent transacts with Citizens. So if you're writing commercial res, you have to have 3 appointments. You're writing commercial non-res, 3 appointments. Personal res, you have to have 3 appointments. One of the areas that we saw, and I know Citizens received some feedback, was some agents are a little bit more reliant on brokered business in the commercial marketplace. And whether that's brokered business to an E&S insurer or to an authorized insurer, there were some agencies and agents who were a lot more reliant on that brokered business. Purpose of that provision was to make sure that agents, were properly shopping that business in the marketplace. Right. But if they're dealing with a broker, they don't have those appointments. So we wanted to create a process wherein an agent could attest, I have marketplace access. I just may not have those appointments because of my relationships with brokers. So we've worked with Citizens. Citizens was gracious enough to help us draft that provision. And I don't like to speak for others, but I think that they've been pretty open that they are supportive of that provision. And so that's the second piece. I'll just very briefly touch on the rest of the bill because there is quite a bit. But as we're working on this, we wanted to make sure that we had a bill that if we're going to ask sponsors, we're doing as much cleanup and different things that we can do, because those 2 issues on their own would be a pretty short bill. And so we're working with the Surplus Lines Association. And one of the things that they have long wanted to do was to essentially copy and paste any provision in Chapter 627 that has been applied to surplus lines insurers and move it into their actual regulatory statute. So there's a good 70 pages of that bill of just copying and pasting provisions from one chapter of law to another.
Just clean up language.
And we're not going to get into that today.
No, we're not.
Okay. So, all right, folks. Again, if you have questions on that thing, but as you know, those of us, and BG included now, have seen the diligent effort discussion for the last several years. We hope to land the plane this year, put it in taxi and put it in the hangar.
I've told both of our bill sponsors that I could probably line up 2,000 agents to crowd surf them out of their chambers if this bill gets passed this year. So, yeah.
So let's switch to House Bill 13, BG, which is the windstorm coverage by Citizens bill by Representative Cassell. You mentioned her earlier. She was a sitting Democrat. She got reelected, and she decided to come across the line there and became a Republican to, again, give a supermajority to that chamber.
A record number.
Supermajority. Record number.
86. The previous record was 85.
Okay.
So I'm glad that you brought that point back up, because the sponsor of this bill matters. She is the vice chair of the House Insurance and Banking Subcommittee. Now, what I will say is that there is no Senate companion bill at the moment.
Okay.
Now, that can change as members can file bills up until, is it midnight the night before?
The night before, yeah, when session starts.
So when session starts, bills will continue to be filed. So a companion bill to this may file. But as I mentioned earlier in the political update, the cost of insurance continues to be the number one issue for Floridians in the state, number one issue for Floridians, period. And so this bill by Vice Chair Cassell would propose to allow citizens to write windstorm coverage, including for contents, for any homeowner in the state of Florida.
Any homeowner.
Any homeowner.
Wind-only policies.
Wind-only policies. And so I don't like to make very strong predictions, but I think at a moment in time where we are seeing citizens depop, now we'll see what the recent rates do. If that bears any impact, we're hopeful it doesn't, but still to be seen. But Dave, you're seeing more takeouts occur than I think we've seen in a long time.
Long time.
Citizens is now below 1 million policies.
They are.
And so as the state continues to focus on depop, I'm going to find it very hard to believe that this bill makes any substantial movement. What I will say is, given that she is the vice chair of the committee, I think it's reasonable to believe that there will be some movement on the bill.
Again, and we talk about, I didn't go into this when we were talking about the rates, but the first phone call I made when I heard about the order was, what's that going to do to depop? Because carriers had to make their selection. They had to determine those policies months ago, right? Now you're in a position where you're competing based on the current citizens' rates. So you do your rate calculations accordingly. Now you have a rate filing that says something different. How does that adjust? Because as we all know, that sitting in this room and certainly on this call, it's all based on the availability and cost of reinsurance and how that plays. So more to come on this, but we'll see what the impact will be going forward on depop based on the new rates coming out by citizens. So, all right, let's switch gears and go to Senate Bill 128, Residential Property Insurers by Senator Burgess.
So I won't spend a whole lot of time on this bill, but this is one of the bills that I wanted to discuss. I've gotten a lot of calls from agents on this bill. Senate Bill 128, Residential Property Insurers by Senator Burgess. As you can see, again, there's not a House companion to the bill, but this language has now been included in a separate bill, which we'll talk about later.
Okay. What
this bill does, though, and that way I don't have to... Actually, we'll just hit this one again later, but just remember Senate Bill 128, the cancellation and non-renewal notice requirements for insurers. I just wanted to briefly touch on it, given that we've gotten so many calls about this bill and there have been several articles written about it.
All right, and then we're going to go to Senate Bill 230 and touch on this one, and it's certainly... a lot of talk, BG, pre-storm, post-storm, about claim handling, claim protocols. I know the OIR is demanded additional data points to come to be reviewed to see where claim activities are, and certainly to really narrow down on damage itself, where the damage is and the amount of damage. So let's talk about this bill a little bit, Senate Bill 230.
So every year there is a group of insurance stakeholders, lobbyists that represent a myriad of insurance interests. And every year that small group sits down and puts together kind of what they consider to be their insurance omnibus bill. They sit down, they draft a bill, they all bring their priorities from their companies, their associations, what have it, and they kind of all dump them into the bill, and then they have an agreement that if there's anything in there that's controversial, it's coming out of the bill.
Gotcha.
What I will say is, if you listen to the speaker's opening day of session, when he organizational session back in November, one of his talking points was, we are not going to be sitting around and doing nothing but passing bills that are drafted by insurance lobbyists.
Which
Okay.
this one is exactly that.
But I did want to highlight this one, because if you look at that last bullet point, there is a problem in this bill. One of the provisions would reduce the number of pre-licensure requirements for general lines agents from 200 down to 60. That is something that is currently on our plan of work to oppose.
As you can imagine, folks, the first one to comment was our friend from Southwest Florida.
Are they going?
So go ahead.
And so we have met with the group, and we have very politely told them that they're going to have enough troubles with this bill, but they're going to have one other really big problem if this provision doesn't come out of the bill. Yeah. It's just not the right time to be having that discussion. A lot of the motivations for it just are not correct. So as this bill doesn't move, or does move miraculously, we're going to have to continue to monitor it to ensure that if it does start to pick up some momentum, that piece comes out.
And there's no House companion at the moment, BG. I think they did have a plan.
They do have a House sponsor. I believe it's going to be Representative Burfield. It was the last that I heard. But we're going to be there to make sure that one piece comes out.
All right, before we move on, I just want to make just highlight a couple comments that came in, of course, from our friend in Southwest Florida. Are they going to dumb down the test? If they can't pass the 200 hours, how are they going to pass with only 60 hours? Please do not dumb down the test. And then our friend Lori says, we already have too many agents who took all 200 hours and still can't conduct insurance. So let's we're having a little fun today with this, but certainly FAI is on it. BG just mentioned it. And Alicia agrees with Lori. Lori is correct. So thank you for the comments, ladies. And we're gonna move on to the next item. But we certainly wanted to get a good blood boiling this morning, right? It's Friday. We want to get everybody revved up a little bit. So I want to, we want to go to
Senate Bill 592. As you're Laura and I have so much fun this time of year, because we see these bills coming out, and it's to sit in the room with Laura when she's reading a bill is one of the best experiences, because she has no poker face when she's reading them, and she's like, no, that's dumb, no. And so it's always fun to read these things. But Senate Bill 592, I'm going to let Laura talk about this one.
Yeah, so this was the My Safe Florida condo pilot program that was passed last session.
right, which a lot of people took advantage
A
of.
lot of people, unfortunately, the funding wasn't sufficient, and I think they ran out of funds for that program in a matter of a couple days.
Exactly.
I mean, it was crazy. But anyway, this just does some various cleanups to what's in statute with regard to the grant program. And it specifies that detached units on individual parcels aren't covered by this. It's got to be a condo at least 3 stories high, and at least one of the residential units has to be seeking a grant. It makes changes in the requirements for grant applications from unanimous consent of the condo unit owners to 75%. So 75% of the unit owners approve participation in the grant program, then that would be sufficient. And it makes some changes with regard to the opening protection and roof relating adjustments, what is eligible for a grant, and includes now replacing roof covering if it's necessary for some of the other improvements. And then it also addresses allocations per square foot for roof projects and allocations for window and door opening protection.
So it looks like we've learned some from the original pilot program. We're trying to make it better. certainly, I would assume there's additional funding that's going to be part of this,
Yep.
right?
So the governor's budget recommendation, and we've got a slide on this at the end, but
Okay.
the governor's recommendation, which is all we have for the appropriations process at this point, is an additional $30 million to fund the program for fiscal year 25-26.
Well, that should take 2 weeks then.
But we'll get 2 weeks.
Not long.
Not long, because that's, when you talk about condo associations, I know it limits the type of condo association, but still, there's a lot of those in the state of Florida.
That's right.
All right. So, folks, again, going to Senate Bill 554. Don Gates is back in the Senate, BG.
President Gates is back in the, well, I was about to say he's back in the House, but he's back in the Senate. So you all will remember that name, President Gates, up in Florida's first Senate district over Northwest Florida. Took a little brief stint out of office and then, decided it was time to come back. This is the big bill that I think everyone in the industry is talking about. As we have been prepping for the 2025 legislative session, there's been so much speculation about what may be done to try and unwind recent reforms. And this is that bill. Senate Bill 554 by President Gates, and then by another strong Republican, Representative Alex Andrade. A big focus of this bill, outside of recent reforms, is requiring a lot more disclosures, a lot more reporting, public reporting on executive compensation and other financial considerations. They are really trying to shine a spotlight on the compensation of some of these executives within insurance companies. That's a touchy issue, right? It is. These people are taking on these positions with these companies that are incredibly difficult. And I'm not here to attest or to endorse one way or another what they should be paid, but it does add extra complexities. As these companies that are coming in and trying to start up these new companies, there's already so much risk associated. Now you're shining a spotlight on what their compensation is. But that pales in comparison to what's on the second page of that bill, which is an attempt to essentially
Just keep
undo.
going. I apologize, folks. We're having a little difficulty.
Undo the one-way attorney fees. And so, if y'all will remember, going back, it really started in 2019 and then into 21 and 22. But the repeal of the one-way attorney fees did not happen overnight. There were several changes made during that period of time where they were addressing attorneys' fees. And at one moment in time, we had, for a brief period of time, we had essentially a sliding scale. And based off of what the final offer was from the insurer, where the judgment ended up, where that fell into consideration with the demand and the final offer, that determined who got how much in attorney's fees.
Right.
And then ultimately the legislature moved to just get rid of one-way attorney fees and property insurance. And so this bill will actually go backwards in that it puts a sliding scale back into place. Now,
Yeah. And it says, so it basically says a prevailing party is entitled to attorney fees based on this sliding scale, which again, once the one-way attorney fees were eliminated, there is a statute in place for all cases,
Right,
litigated cases, that says a prevailing party can file a motion with the judge to seek attorney fees, and there are criteria that must be met. And it's up to the judge to consider whether or not those would be awarded. But this actually would mandate the award of attorney fees to a prevailing party pursuant to this sliding scale.
when we talk about these bills, Dave, we talk about them in the way of what may happen if this bill passes.
Right.
But I would take that one step further. And, we talked about this on our team meeting the other day, and Kyle was talking about some discussions that he's had as he's been on his travels. And, this has been the biggest hurdle for a lot of these capital groups, for the reinsurers, is they're, debating on whether or not they should deploy capital to the state of Florida. And those who maybe have not made that decision yet, they always talk about, we're worried that Florida, they've done what they need to do. Great. Like, this makes this a great opportunity to invest in this marketplace. But we're worried. We're worried that those things may be undone. And so when you see these bills filed,
right,
it automatically strokes the fears and kind of confirms that thought process. I'd hate to deploy all this capital into this state, and then they just turn around, go back to the old ways of doing business, and here we are again.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, the people sitting in this room, and certainly many of you on this audience, have gone to carrier meetings. You've gone to groups that are talking about the market. Lori says, is anybody listening? She made a comment on the group here, but that's what they point to. They point to stability, because the one-way attorney's fees no longer will create a tail that many are suffering with, of a tail of litigation. And so if we start unraveling that a little bit, yeah, there's going to be some folks who say, you know what, let me pump the brakes here. I mean, we were talking to agents this week. The carrier reps are coming in and saying, hey, we're opening zip codes. We got capacity again. We want to write some new business. That all is happening because of these reforms. So hopefully, we can starve those off a little bit and keep some stability back in the marketplace.
Well, the kind of the litmus test that I use, and as I'm talking to my colleagues in the lobbying industry, and they speculate over what they're hearing and what the rumor mill's churning out that day, I say, here's the way that I choose to think about things. At the moment, we know a few things. Insurance continues to be the cost of insurance
right.
continues to be the number one political issue for these elected officials. They are already, the Republican supermajorities in the House and Senate are already being accused of only being in the pockets of the big bad insurers. Despite seeing all the positives, many consumers have not seen their rates go down. And so for the legislature to consider bills, they really have to go through that lens and ask themselves the question, is this going to provide an immediate relief to the cost of insurance? And this bill will not do that. And the truth is anything they do try and do to change the cost of insurance overnight is probably going to create even bigger issues.
Right.
And so it's just it's a difficult thing, but you're already seeing the impacts of this bill, as many of those individuals who are now looking at this marketplace are starting to say,
yep,
should I do this?
Yep. Alicia brings up a good point. There's many, and I said it, that are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. They don't want to see the oncoming train again.
No.
They don't want to. So let's turn our attention to Senate Bill 790, which is interesting. From the recent fires in California, BG, we were following that, and their insurance commissioner filed something about starving off non-renewals and cancellations. And I said to our friend, our general counsel, Laura Pearce, I said, I wonder how many calls that association is going to get over this language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can tell you, I don't know if we're keeping track anymore, Laura, but it's at least 1,000 that we've received over the last several years, calls from members about the emergency order and how it impacts non-renewals and cancellations. So what are we talking about here on these two bills?
So if you will, let me take you back to 2024. Now, I've largely tried to block that year out of my brain for a multitude of reasons. It could have something to do with this bill. It could have something to do with Florida State only winning 2 football games. I wrote 2024 off.
Gotcha.
However, this bill was a byproduct of an FAIA priority in 2024. And what we found is we have, and we tell legislators all the time, a lot of what we do is an association, is constituency services. Agents, as they are transacting business on behalf of their consumers in the marketplace, they oftentimes experience different things with different insurers. And I one thing we're always very careful on the messaging on this bill was a lot of times it's not companies doing nefarious things. These executive orders can be rather convoluted. Statute is more than convoluted, which is one of the reasons we're pursuing this bill this year, but was to provide some clarity and, some guidance on what the intent of those statutes were, which was very simple. If a hurricane comes into town, plows through, causes damage, an insurer cannot get off of that policy until the completion of the repairs. For obvious reasons. Nobody else is going to write that policy for that home if it's got or commercial residential building home.
It has damage.
Or commercial non-res, and it has damage. And so there were some nuanced things that we were seeing where, companies were having differing interpretations of how that statute applied. Very fair questions too. I mean,
totally agree.
And so it wasn't ever intended to be you insurance companies are doing the wrong thing. It was listen, this was the intent of the law. And I'll tell you, to your point, Laura gets the overwhelming majority of them to the extent she told me to create a folder so we could keep all of them. And so this bill is a repeat from last year. It just clarifies an insurer's responsibilities following a hurricane to ensure that consumers are not left in a situation where they have lost their coverage before the damages have been repaired. There's also a provision in there that ensures, because the executive order or the commissioner's executive order and the statute, they speak a lot to cancellations and non-renewals, but they don't speak to how renewals are handled.
Right.
And so what we did see, more on the E&S side, more in the commercial non-res side, but also in the commercial residential side, is companies were saying, all right, we have to stay on the risk. We're going to extend your coverage, or we're going to offer you a renewal, but there's going to be a lot of changes in this.
Yep.
And so again, just making sure consumers are not finding themselves in a situation where, because of being a product of their circumstances from the storm, that they're not stuck in a tumultuous place. If y'all remember earlier, I talked about Senate Bill 128. Dave, we'd kick it over the next slide.
Yeah.
I mentioned that there was another piece, Senate Bill 128 by Senator Burgess. That bill didn't have a companion, so that bill has been added on to this bill. So current law says that anytime a company wants to cancel or non-renewal policy, they have to give a 120-day notice requirement. This bill, and I've talked to the sponsor of it quite a bit, he was wanting to make sure that no one found themselves in the situation where they were not noticing, or they did not know that their policy was being canceled or non-renewed. So he added in this bill, filed this bill that says that an insurer has to provide a notice 45 days in advance before a cancellation, non-renewal, and all that good stuff.
And that's he applied that to homeowners policies only.
And so the problem with it is that it also says that they have to email the notice if email is available. Well, the problem with that is that bill conflicts with two existing laws, the 120-day requirement, and then there are laws on the books that say that you cannot compel or force someone to receive electronic notice. They have to opt into that.
Right.
And so we are still working through kind of what it is that he's trying to capture, because as it stands today, this could be interpreted to reduce the current notice requirements of 120 days. And so that was added into this bill from last year that dealt with cancellations and non-renewals in the wake of a catastrophic event. But there's going to have to be some work on this bill if it's done, or if it starts moving forward.
Right. Okay. So again, if you have some questions, we certainly have a lot of comments about some of the validity and emphasis on these bills. But Laura, last thing, as I'm switching slides, just to remind everybody, You know, Hurricane Ian, Hurricane Helene, Hurricane. Does that order expire?
So the orders, the emergency orders from OIR regarding policy cancellations and non-renewals that for property that is not damaged, that moratorium period of 60 days does expire. In fact, it already has expired for the recent hurricanes that were this past fall. However, there's another provision in the emergency order that invokes the statute that says if the property is damaged, and if it's residential property or commercial residential property, if the property is damaged, then the statute applies that says that policies can't be canceled or non-renewed until 90 days after repairs are complete. So there's a little bit of confusion out there. Does the order expire? Does it not expire? Some provisions do expire, but that particular provision that applies to damaged property does not expire.
Yeah, I just want to remind you because we get that question quite a bit and it goes back several storms. Okay.
Right.
There is something in the statute that says if the cause of the repairs is caused by the homeowner in delaying, there is some language there that then the insurer can invoke getting off the risk.
Right. But it depends
But that's
on whether
rare circumstance.
an insurer has to allege that the homeowner actually unreasonably
Exactly.
delayed the repairs.
So, all right. You know, we mentioned citizens several times. We're going to mention it again. There's certainly a bill here, House Bill 705, BG, and that talks about annual rate increases for citizens.
Yeah, so I gave the disclosure earlier so I could use it later on, but this was a bill that was just filed, was it yesterday?
2 days ago.
Or 2 days ago. So as I've mentioned, that there may have been additional bills filed. We've been on this call. So
Right.
We have not had an opportunity to vet every single one of these bills with the bill sponsors. And certainly there's been no movement on these bills. But, when we read through these pieces of legislation, you usually get a pretty good idea of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. I would put this one in the category of I get what it reads technically on paper, which is it exempts policies, new and renewal policies that are effective after June 1st, 2025 from the glide path. But it also exempts them from annual rate increases. And so we're not quite sure what the intent of the bill sponsor is at the moment. But in just plain reading of it, it exempts them from the glide path and annual rate increases. So I suspect this is a legislator from down in Southeast Florida who has filed this bill. They are probably trying to ensure that people don't continue to get rate increases at Citizens. But to this point, we're not quite sure what they're trying to accomplish. But given the substance of the bill, did think it was important to talk about on the call this morning. Laura, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just technically, if that is what he's trying to accomplish, I think there may be some technical issues with it too, because it's hard to understand how in reality that will work.
One question that came in from Danielle, just to close the loop on our non-renewals. What if the association is damaged, but the unit isn't damaged? So the association itself is damaged.
Then the association has a policy that applies to that association. That would be the commercial residential policy, and the order would
still
apply. So that commercial res policy could not be canceled or non-renewed until the condo association property is repaired.
But what about the unit owner policy within a damaged association?
Well, again, I mean the unit. It depends if that unit has damage or not.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So again, keep the questions coming, but we're going to turn our attention to My Safe Florida Home. This has certainly been a hot topic. It kind of was reinvented a few years ago. Condo associations now are in play, but the governor has certainly tried to put some funding in these programs for consumers to continue to harden their homes, to take advantage of these programs. So if there is, if and when, right? It's not if anymore, it's when the event occurs, some of them will not be as damaged because of some of these additional provisions.
Absolutely. So to your point, this program's popularity has exploded in the past couple of years. And, the second that the fiscal year appropriation becomes effective and the department starts taking applications, those funds are diminished essentially overnight. And so at this moment, the legislature, they'll go through the appropriations process later. But what we can point to is the governor's budget recommendations, which includes $590 million for the My Safe Florida Home program. 480 of that would be to service existing applications that did not, make the cut under the previous funding, and an additional 109 in recurring funds to make sure that the program continues to operate moving forward. And so given the popularity of that program, given the immense focus from the state on home hardening, on building codes, I think it's a fair expectation to expect that we will see something similar to this come out of the legislature when they start to go through that appropriations process. We also, as we talked about the condominium pilot program bill earlier, the governor's recommended to fund that again at $30 million this year. And we would suspect as that program kind of moves from the pilot phase to a more permanent program, I would expect in future years we'll start to see that number tick up on the condo side.
And again, on this conversation, other conversations are ensuing whether or not the uniform mitigation form is still applicable, because there's so many advances that are going on with construction, with all the features that now somebody can add to their home to harden it, which certainly should be considered for a discount.
Yeah.
So there is some talk in and around the industry whether or not the 1802 should be updated.
So full disclosure, I didn't know the form was called an 1802 form. And I was sitting in a meeting not too long ago with the commissioner, and he kept talking about it. And I was like, I know what that is. I obviously know what that is. But the office is going through, and if you've watched any of the committee hearings recently, we're in that process where they're doing panels, and the commissioners, the OIR is currently in rulemaking right now on that very specific form. Yep. To make sure that they account for all of those mitigation discounts and other items. So
again, so those are the bills. There's plenty more. We encourage you, again, if you've not registered for Capital Days, to join us. Come up to Tallahassee, see the process. Like BG says, it's the first week, so you're going to really see a lot of pomp and circumstance from this. Again, a reminder: Capital Days. And don't forget, my apologies, folks, this getting a little testy with me, but during session, FAI session newsletter and bill tracker is updated on a regular basis. It's got good information. It helps arm you with talking to your local legislator.
Yep.
When they're back in the district on the weekend, you run into them at Denny's, you run into them at a ballpark. Bring some of these issues up that are important to us.
Yes, so we'll have the bill tracker, something that we've been doing the past few years, and we essentially put together kind of a tracking sheet of every bill that would be of interest to FAI's members, whether or not they're moving or not, because things can pick up momentum. Substance of a bill that's not moving can be put onto another bill at a later date. And so we track the movement of all of those and hyperlink them to all of the bill summaries so you can read more about the bills. But it's just a really good tool to be able to reference to say, I remember Laura or Dave or BG or Kyle talking about this bill. I wonder what's going on with that bill. And you can see where it's at in the committee process. You can see how the bill has changed throughout the committee process and get kind of any and all that information that you'd like to get on that bill.
All right, as we close out today, and again, thank you for those attending today, and certainly Laura and BG, but Lori wants to know, are we getting additional information prior to Capitol Days? Is there anything going to be published? And when is the bill tracking information actually go online?
So we'll start reporting the bill tracker once the bill filing deadline's done.
Gotcha.
So we have all of the bills that are filed in the queue. We'll start week 1 of session. That's when the weekly updates will be provided on the bill tracker. Our Capitol Days materials, we don't publish those in advance, not because we don't want our members to have that, but as we talked about earlier, bills are going to continue to be filed over the next week. And so what we don't want to do is give people incomplete information. We want to make sure that they have everything that they need. And then from that point forward, it's all in one place.
Okay. Yeah. So Lori, more to come on that, but that's one of the reasons some of that stuff has to wait till Capitol Days because of the deadlines. So just a reminder, we record these sessions. So if you missed something or you want to go back and listen to a comment or two, we certainly encourage you. It's on the Friday Morning Live page under the Education tab of our website. And next week, we're going to have our friend Nolan Duda from Ideal Traits. Many of us in this room and in this building are looking for new team members in different departments, and certainly, and we know our members are as well. So Ideal Traits is a Big I partner and looking to form more of a partnership with FAI. So tune in next week to Nolan Duda to talk about staffing and some of the considerations that you need in your office. So thanks. A lot of comments, BG. Thanks for the hard work. Laura, thank you for the hard work that you're about to do. I know it's something that needs to be done, and we appreciate it, and I know the members appreciate it. So, folks, thank you for tuning in to Friday Morning Live. We appreciate your time, appreciate your comments. You know how to reach us if you have anything offline. But have a great weekend. And if there is a baseball stadium close by, spring training, high school, anything, go out and enjoy this time of the year with baseball, and certainly it's a great thing to have back. Spring, nothing like it, right, BG?
Sports, cold beers, and hot dogs.
There you go.
Fires me up.
All right, folks. Thanks. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.